Katerina Jakob watched the German soldiers flee. Streaming from the east, that's what she was seeing. Allied bombers flew above them. She thought they all might die, and then soon there was the silence of all the SS men. When the sun rose the next morning, it was the 1st of May, and they all sang the Internationale. They all sang the Internationale. Katerina Jakob saw red flags flapping in the breeze above the Russian tanks, and she fell upon her knees. And so many different voices in so many different tongues sang the most beautiful song that could ever have been sung. In German, Lithuanian, in Polish and in Dutch, a myriad of melodies has never had been such. In Russian and in Yiddish, Italian and French, emerging from the forests beneath the trench. When the sun rose the next morning, it was the 1st of May, and they all sang the Internationale. When the sun rose the next morning, it was the 1st of May, and they all sang the Internationale. They all sang the Internationale. Völker hört die Signale auf zum letzten Gefecht. Die Internationale erkämpft das Menschenrecht. Völker hört die Signale auf zum letzten Gefecht. Die Internationale erkämpft das Menschenrecht.
Hello and welcome to Revolutionary Socialist Review for May 27th, 2021. My name is Chris Driscoll, and along with me is Rainer Shea. We're the two co-hosts for the show, and I hope you like what we bring, or at least, well, actually, you're probably not going to like some of it, but at least appreciate what we bring. The first topic is actually George Floyd, because Tuesday was the 1-year anniversary of the murder of George Floyd. So we'll start off with that. But before we get to that, let's just say hello to Rainer and say, Rainer, how are you? How have you been?
Oh, these last couple of weeks or so, I've been heavily researching what's been going on in Colombia. And what I was about to share with you before we started was when the internet disruption happened just now, when we were getting ready to start this show.
Yeah,
I was reminded of a strange incident that happened in Colombia in this last month, where there was a huge internet disruption. The Colombian government claimed that it was due to an unnamed act of vandalism, unattributed act of vandalism. They couldn't find who did it, but we all know who did it. U.S. Cyber Command.
Yeah. The imperialists are trying to shut things down because people are getting too connected, too organized, too much in there and so forth, too much hitting the streets, basically. I read a couple of good articles on what's going on in Colombia today. I didn't include them in the in the show's topics, and I kept going back and forth thinking that I should, but Anyway, you have raised it, so that's good that at least we give it a mention. We promise in the near future to deal with or address the situation in Colombia with a lot more depth than we are able to do tonight. So with that, okay, so that's it. That's how you're doing. That's what you've been up to. Good.
Yeah.
I've been up to moving, and as people can see, I'm looking a bit shabby today. That's because my green screen has had to just be kind of like draped in whatever way I could possibly get it up. And it's not the permanent solution. Absolutely not the permanent situation. The lighting, I don't know, is kind of just like jury rigged, as they say. The racist American soldiers during World War I and World War II used to call it jerry rigged because they called the Germans Jerrys, but the actual term is jury rigged. And hopefully most political people know what that is. That's when you, well, that's America, really. I mean, that's when you deliberately fiddle with the parameters of electoral districts so as to ensure that you will win. And the Democrats do that, and the Republicans do that all the time. The entirety of America is so jury-rigged, it's unbelievable. But anyway, let's launch right into the show. The first topic, how justice for George Floyd shook the ruling class to the core 1 year ago. 1 year ago on Tuesday, as I said a little bit ago. And this comes from a great article that I found on the, let's see if I can find it here. It was on the, oh, here we go. On the, where is it? Now I'm forgetting where it was from the Party of Socialism and Liberation. That's where it's from, I think, or else it may have been from the Workers' World Party. One of those two, which in my brain they're kind of almost exactly alike, almost like duplicates of one another. Totally unnecessary to even have two of them when they both came from the same place in the first place, in my humble opinion. I happen to know from insider knowledge that their whole split in the Workers' World Party was all over personality issues. It wasn't over politics, which is always a shame, because at least if you're going to have a frickin' split, make it over politics, for fuck's sake. Don't you agree, yeah. Rainer?
I agree.
I mean, if you look at it today, Party yeah, if you look at it today, Workers' World Party and PSL are still extremely similar in their party lines. But anyway, this article, I do believe this article is from the Workers' World Party newspaper, and they say, although it could be. Anyway, they say on May 25th, 2020, 44-year-old white Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin knelt on 46-year-old unarmed black man George Floyd's neck for 9 minutes and 29 seconds, sadistically murdering him. Floyd was accused of using a counterfeit $20 bill, at a local convenience store in the middle of a pandemic that left tens of millions of Americans out of work and deeper in poverty. Floyd was a victim of the capitalist system, one of the tens of millions who were out of employment. The deadly encounter between Floyd and Chauvin was captured on video by community members and went viral shortly thereafter. The next day, Black working class communities of Minneapolis led thousands of people of all nationalities demanding justice and accountability, inspiring a nationwide protest movement against racism and police brutality that brought an estimated 35 million people into the streets in righteous and militant indignation. Solidarity protests were held in 60 countries all over the world, from Palestine to Haiti to South Korea and more, as brutal force and thousands upon thousands of arrests were employed to repress the movement. The racist underbelly of so-called U.S. democracy was on display for the entire world. Chauvin was convicted of 2 counts of murder and 1 count of manslaughter on April 20th. Facing sentencing in June, that's coming up pretty quick here, Chauvin could be put in prison for 40 years for second-degree murder, up to 25 years of third-degree murder, and up to 10 years for manslaughter. Yet since that fateful day in May 2020, many more people have been killed by the U.S. police. Some of these people's names are widely known, such as Dwayne Wright, Kaya Bryant, Adam Toledo, Andre Brown. George Floyd's murder was the straw that broke the camel's back. But no matter how much negative attention the police get, as an institution of racist rule by a tiny class of super rich, they cannot help but enact all kinds of violence against poor and working class communities, especially Black communities. The fundamental task of the police is to preserve the capitalist, racist status quo. While the verdict was a victory secured through arduous struggle, we know that true, enduring justice can only be enjoyed by winning a new system that removes the bias for white supremacy and all other unspeakable injustices in this society. To honor George Floyd's memory, millions have and will commit themselves to this task. There's a lot more to that article. I'm just reading you some highlights, but I really think it was great, a great article, and something that, yeah, it's from liberationnews.org. That's where it's from. I just found the URL here. And liberationnews.org is the newspaper of the Party of Socialism and Liberation. So underneath the video that we are taping tonight, you will find this link that you can go straight to the article. As I say, it's a really great article and you really should read it. I think the comrades at the PSL have outdone themselves in writing up such a great tribute to George Floyd and memoriam, and incitation to doing more of the same that we've done over the last year. That is bringing 35 million people out into American streets. That is unprecedented. I can guarantee you that. That is unprecedented, at least for the last half century. It is unprecedented. It is extraordinary that Americans responded this way. And as they say in this article, it portends to a lot more, because it's obvious that these people are these millions and millions of people are coming out for a lot more than just the death of one man, however horrendous and however enraging that is. They are coming out against the whole system, because they are starting to figure out that the whole system has holes in it from top to bottom. It is about to cave in. It is a terrible system. And Rayner, especially in some of the great articles that he has written over the last couple of weeks, and I as well, will continue along on that theme, basically, for this entire episode of Revolutionary Socialist Review. Rayner, over to you.
For so long, prior to when these protests started, I was speculating about what would set off the next wave of demonstrations, since the United States has certainly been a powder keg for social unrest. Since the Occupy movement, the country's capacity for unrest has only increased. The longer this dozen or so year long depression has gotten. And after the dual crises in 2020 of the pandemic, which was exacerbated by the contradictions of capitalism, and the Greater Depression, as they're calling it, when those two things hit, it was only a matter of time before a protest movement like this would be set off. And I think it's reflective of the nature of the contradictions within our society that the catalyst event was violence by the colonial police against a colonized person living under colonial military occupation. And it's appropriate that Black Lives Matter, rather than some kind of revamped Occupy movement, was the umbrella under which these protesters gathered. Because when a revolution happens in the United States, well, what's going to be the primary contradiction that compels the sufficient amount of the masses to rise up in this way, to want to overthrow their government? The principal contradiction, the first thing that's going to happen is the defeat. The principal contradiction is going to be colonialism, since capitalism is a symptom of colonialism. There wouldn't be capitalism here if not for colonialism. And what's going to happen first, I think, is the abolition of the United States, the settler colonial state that's perpetuating this kind of violence against people of color, and the returning of jurisdiction over to the nations whose land was stolen. From there, we'll be able to build socialism within these nations. And there's going to be contradictions, obviously, but this is the general outline of how revolution is going to unfold in what's currently called the United States. So what's happened in this last year, that's certainly, I think it's an omen for what the U.S. empire can expect.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And that brings us into several of your articles that you will be talking about tonight that have in one way or another address aspects of colonialism, the colonial settler state, and so forth. And actually, we finish up tonight with an article by Rayner, topic number 8, Anti-Colonial Revolution is our only route towards safety. And you could kind of look at what Rayner just said as an introduction to that one, certainly. So, very good, very good. And yeah, I think now that the things are getting a little bit better in chaotic, anarchic America. Anarchic in the sense that America's organization and production is pure anarchy, as Marx often pointed out. In that environment, even in that environment, the COVID-19 plague is getting a little bit better in America, and I think that people will also, a large number of people have been inoculated. So I think people will start coming out more and more. It was amazing to me that even in the midst of this plague, so many people, 35 million. You know, when you do the figures, sociologists and anthropologists have done studies of what large numbers of protesters really mean as far as representation of the rest. And it represents a whole huge number of people, because it's not just the people who come out. For everyone that comes out, there are a lot of them who sympathize with all of what the protesters are saying. It really is a significant thing, far more significant than any of the clown car fiestas that Donald Trump, former President Donald Trump, put on. And we won't even mention the Democrats. The pathetic Biden is so, you know, and Hillary Clinton before him, they were so pathetic they couldn't draw crowds at all, you know. So yeah, at least you got to say, you know, Trump can draw, you know, 10, 12,000 people to a rally. I don't think Biden has ever done that in his life, and I know that the pathetic criminal Hillary Clinton had never pulled out crowds like that. So anyway, next on the list, the brewing social tension that will break America apart, which also is pretty much flows right out of you know, what we've been talking about here so far. Rainer Shea, take it away.
Well, the thing about this increase of social tensions, this increase of America's identity as a social tinderbox, increase the right word, the fact that the United States is becoming more of a social tinderbox in this last decade or so, with entering into the Great Recession and then this additional economic crash in this last year. It represents a cycle of economic deterioration that's going to eventually make it so that far bigger social upheavals, even as compared to the one we've seen this last year, is going to be able to happen in a couple of decades, which incidentally is when a 2019 Pentagon report I talk about in my article says there will likely be huge power grid breakdowns. Likely within a couple of decades, there's going to be a very chaotic dynamic that the communist parties are going to hopefully manage to harness and turn that social chaos into an armed and equipped rebellion movement, in the same vein as the guerrilla movements in places like Ecuador, India, Colombia. And what's going to set off these future social upheavals, where tens of millions of people, even more than 35 million, are engaging in these kinds of uprisings amid deteriorated economic conditions, the catalyst that's going to set this off is likely going to be some huge, shocking provocation from the state, where the government, in its desperation to put down a class revolt, carries out some horrifying act of violence, perhaps along the lines of the Move bombing in 1985, where Philadelphia police bombed an entire city block to wipe out a Black liberation group. There's probably going to be many more instances of state violence that are going to surpass even the ones we've seen this last year, such as the shootings of protesters needlessly, the incident in Portland last year where the DHS agents were putting protesters into unmarked vehicles. These kinds of escalations of state violence are going to continue, along with the deterioration of economic conditions. The logical conclusion is the outbreak of a protest movement that's more than a protest movement, that perhaps spills into the kind of strike that broke the power of Cuba's dictatorship in the lead up to Cuba's socialist revolution. So that'll likely be how the socialist revolution in this country starts, with a huge catalyst event in the form of a state provocation in the midst of deteriorated socioeconomic conditions for the masses. And of course, that'll only be able to result in revolution if we communist organizers manage to build up the vanguard organizations, equip ourselves, get perhaps most importantly, sufficiently equipped in our minds and our head spaces. Are we ready to take on this task of leading the masses towards transitioning to a new socioeconomic system under a new state?
Well, that's a good question to end by. My feeling right now is the answer is no. However, these things are symbiotic in nature. As the mass movement explodes spontaneously, as it has already been doing in the last year, as we just spoke of, in the most astounding, amazing way. Yet most even leftists, so-called leftists, American leftists, if you can call them real leftists, most Marxists that I know, most communists that I know, people who call themselves communists, people who call themselves Marxists and Leninists, most of them do not quite seem to be getting what's happening in the last year. The comrades at PSL certainly are getting it. You can go, I invite you once again to go read that article on George Floyd, and you'll see they're getting it. But most are not. So, yeah, are they ready? Are the cadre elements in America ready? I mean, to begin with, there aren't very many of them, but then again, there weren't very many Bolsheviks in January 1917. I can give you the figure. It was 12,000 in a country of close to 100 million people, the largest country in the world by landmass, certainly. And one of the two, I think the second or third largest country at that time in the world by population. Prior to and leading up to the revolution in 2000 and 1917, 12,000 people ultimately made the Bolshevik Revolution. Well, it wasn't just 12,000 people, because from January of 1917, when they had 12,000 members nationwide, to October. They call it October. It was October under their old calendar. Under our calendar now, it would be in November. But from January to November, they went from 12,000 members to hundreds of thousands of members as more and more working class people flocked to them. And even many, many, many more than that, millions and millions more than that, who didn't join the Bolshevik Party, followed the leadership of the Bolshevik Party. So with the right program, with a brilliant revolutionary Leninist like Lenin, I'm sure he would have hated it if anybody called him a Leninist, but you get my drift. Somebody with Lenin's brain to lead it all, and the cadre democratic centralist type of organization that he had created, that was what was necessary, and it is still what is necessary, in my opinion, today in America, today everywhere in the world. There's nothing quite so powerful as a cadre organization organized along democratic centralist lines of the Leninist type. So keep that in mind, people. Whatever you do, that's what we need to build. We need to build that. I look around and I don't really see, I see some that are kind of close, that maybe, you know, they have little faults here and there, but they're kind of close to what Lenin envisioned in a Leninist party. But I don't really quite see a Leninist party, an authentic Leninist party in America. Maybe I'm wrong. I hope I'm wrong, because that's what we need. That's absolutely what we need. Next on the list, America's next big swing towards fascism. Rainer Shea, once again, prolific as always.
Studying the rise of Nazi Germany, how the Nazis were able to get German masses to rationalize the Holocaust, though of course there were obviously lots of efforts by the Nazis to cover up the crimes committed. There was certainly an awareness of Jewish persecution, and they got people to not care about the idea of all these ethnic groups getting persecuted by spreading conspiracy theories that convince people that the only way for Germany to be great again, for the Aryan nation to prosper, was to eliminate these religious and ethnic undesirables, so that Germany could achieve what Hitler called Lebensraum, where the Aryans could grab up a bunch of settler colonial territory throughout Eurasia, in the same vein as how the Europeans grabbed up the native territories. And you look at what's happening now with QAnon, and you see so many parallels between the types of conspiracies that the Nazis propagated about how the Jews had supposedly stabbed Germany in the back following World War I, how the Jews represented some awful obstacle to the progress of the Aryan nation. And there's so many parallels between that and QAnon, where there's this codedly Jewish, obviously, cabal of children's blood drinkers who are running the world. There's even an emphasis on Jewish capitalists like George Soros and the Rothschilds. And this is the recipe for genocide. This is a recipe for the kind of suicidal, hugely destructive warfare that the German Empire embarked on in its era of decay following World War I, where Germany was militarized under the Nazis, and they embraced this insane ideology that called for them to conquer as many lands as possible. However impractical this actually was. By the way, Hitler was incredibly incompetent as a military leader. He made so many foolish decisions, not the least among them trying to invade Russia, which was ironically central to his settler colonial plan. It was so detached from reality. Nonetheless, it resulted in the deaths of hundreds of millions of people, whether by deliberate genocide or by the byproducts of the war that the Nazis started. There's a lot of alarming parallels between that and modern America, where, like during the years when the Nazis rose to power, there's been this huge depression this last year that's been added onto the economic suffering the country has already been experiencing in the decade or so prior to then. And that goes along with the proliferation of these types of conspiracies that convince people to fear and hate an outgroup that's supposedly sucking the nation dry, and that doesn't want the nation to prosper and achieve Lebensraum. There's some interesting historical comparisons to be made here between Germany back then and the United States now, because from the perspective of this genocidal settler colonial ideology, the Americans, the European settlers, have already achieved Lebensraum. They've successfully absorbed the entire continent, whether through settler colonialism or through neocolonialism, by assimilating the native tribes into capitalism. So has been the case in Canada, and really throughout pretty much all of the Americas. They've achieved their Lebensraum, but in the coming decades, they're going to lose a lot of land via climatic changes, sea level rise, agricultural and water systems collapse, the expansion of territories that are too hot for people to live in. There's going to be mass migrations, both within U.S. borders and without. And the fascists, who are likely going to be fully in power by then, let's be real, are going to respond to this by trying to whip up the country's reactionaries into a war frenzy, the type of war frenzy that started World War II. So I wonder what's going to be the country that they decide to attack. Is it going to be Venezuela, China, Russia, Iran? There's really no telling which direction the fascists are going to take out their aggression in, because as we saw with World War II and the incompetent decisions of Hitler, the fascists do not base their war ideology in strategic rationality. They base it in pure emotions, fueled by conspiracy theories. And imagine how destructive that's going to be when it's applied to the United States, a nuclear-armed country.
Yeah, it's a lot to think about. You give us a lot to think about. First of all, it strikes me that it's no wonder at all that Hitler looked to the United States of America for so much inspiration for his ideas. He was in particular, he was strongly influenced by the extremely fascistic, even though fascism wasn't a word back then, the extremely fascistic Confederate States of America, which is a country that only lasted 4 years. But in that time, apparently their ideology, which certainly was a proto-fascism, their ideology was greatly influential on Hitler. But the whole idea of America stretching out, as you say, it's a proto. What's the word? The German word
Lebensraum.
Lebensraum. It's a proto Lebensraum. What America did, what the extremely imperialistic minded American founding fathers. There weren't any women in that, so you really have to say founding fathers. What they did, how they thought, and how they struck out immediately across the continent in this ultra imperialistic fashion, just as they had been, because they were British people to begin with, and Germans and Swedes and Dutch and some Spanish that ended up getting incorporated into this country as well. Imperialistic minded Euros. And yeah, that was a great inspiration to Hitler. Also, what strikes me about your article and the questions you ask is that strain of fascism, which has never left America. It's always been a minority strain, but unfortunately, it has been extremely influential with the most powerful people in America, the capitalist ruling class, which it goes back and forth like a pendulum, but it tends to swing between liberalism and fascism. And they are definitely swung in the fascist direction now. What Franklin Delano Roosevelt, whose great grandfather, by the way, on his Delano's side, made his fortune, the fortune that Franklin Delano Roosevelt lived like a prince on, still many years later. He made his fortune in imperialist ventures in China. He was part of the illegal drug trade, namely opium. And there were a lot of Americans like that who made their millions forcing basically opium on China. So that was one side of Roosevelt's family. The other side, his cousin Teddy had already been president. Teddy Roosevelt, 20 or so, 25, what was it? I guess about 20 years prior. Anyway, when Roosevelt, FDR Roosevelt, the second Roosevelt president, when he came to confronting Japan in the late 1930s, and Japan was everywhere as much a vile imperialist nation as America was. And America didn't like it because in some ways they were encroaching on what America thought of as its colonies, its territory. It was threatening its territory, and it was threatening British territory as well, British colonies in the Far East. And FDR, he didn't really think he was getting into a war with Japan. What he thought was that he was going to squeeze the fuck out of Japan. He was going to starve Japan to death. First and foremost, starve them of oil by throwing up an entire oil blockade around the islands of Japan. Pretty similar to what America has been doing to many countries these days, like what they're doing to China today, what they're doing to to Russia and to Iran today, circling them with a noose of nuclear fire, threatening nuclear fire, and at the same time throwing up sanctions in a concerted effort to try to ruin the economies of Russia, China, and Iran, and several other countries, Syria, for instance. So, yeah. It strikes me that that's pretty much what Biden is doing today, too. He's kind of sort of thinking that he's not going to start a war with Russia or China or Iran, but he's doing all the same idiotic things that threatening acts of war that FDR did against Japan, that forced Japan into attacking as its last resort, either starve or attack. So they attacked. That's what they call the sneak attack in Pearl Harbor. But nobody was surprised that Japan went to war over all of that, after what FDR had been doing to Japan for the couple years prior. So, okay, next on the list, Syria declares its independence from U.S. Western regime change addicts. And this comes from a May 26th article, Wednesday, by Janice Kortkamp. I'm unfamiliar with her. Maybe I should be more familiar. But anyway, Janice Kortkamp in the Greenville Post, which is at greenvillepost.com, GREANVILL post.com. Okay. Anyway, in this article, what she says, let me get down to this point. Yeah, Syria declares independence from U.S. Western regime change addicts. She says, I'm just going to quote some from her article because it's actually pretty darn good and people should take a look at it. I'll just be picking some highlights from it to give you a flavor. She says, it's true that the presidential election happening in Syria today, and she's talking May 26, Wednesday, which is the day that the election happened. And as it happens, Rainer and I are taping this episode on the evening, on the night of May 26, Wednesday. And so we don't know quite what happened in the Syria presidential election yet, but we pretty much do know. Because we know that President Bashar al-Assad is tremendously popular in Syria amongst Syrians, just about as popular as he was in 2014 when he won the last election, hands down. American imperialists, of course, are calling this election a sham election. But it is not a sham election. This reflects the real thinking. And this woman, Janice Kortkamp, has traveled there many times recently. So she knows the Syrian people very well. So I'm just going to go on and quote a little bit more about this. Anyway, she starts out saying, it's true that the presidential election happening today in Syria is not an example of pure Western style democracy. The Syrian people aren't choosing in the, quote, whoever raises the most money wins American style electoral process, which results in citizens having to decide between the likes of a monster mobster Hillary Clinton and schizophrenic used car salesman Donald Trump, or Donald Trump versus the ages-old establishment hack, Joe Biden. Support for President Assad among Syrians from all the many and diverse people groups, religious, ethnic, political, is strong. In my 7 extended trips traveling around most of the country on my own with Syrian friends as guides from 2016 through 2019, that much was immediately obvious and pretty evenly spread. In my opinion, what is important about the election, what is important about the election is this: the Syrian people have made their choice, have rejected the regime change attempt by the same countries that destroyed Iraq, Afghanistan, and Libya, the same countries savagely killing and starving Yemen. The Syrian people have seen and experienced every kind of hell imaginable, and the ones who survive say no. No to the G.W. Bush, Dick Cheney neocons. No to the Obama, Hillary, Kerry warmongering liberals. No to Trump's say one thing, do another foreign policies and actions. No to Biden's many decades-long love of war and lies. No to the punishing sanctions, starving their economy, limiting rebuilding. No to the terrorist and mercenary proxies. No to the illegal invasions and occupations. They are saying Syria is our country, not yours. Get your filthy, greedy, bloody hypocrites' hands off it. Their country has been ravaged, attacked without mercy, slandered, accused, misrepresented, beaten, looted, raped, and bombed. Hundreds of thousands are dead. Millions are left. Nearly half, or millions have left, I'm sorry. Nearly half the population has been displaced from their homes over the course of this crisis. The middle class was thriving before the war. Now it is almost non-existent, and many are starving. Religious harmony was the norm. Now there is much distrust. Women were empowered. Now so many are widows or mothers who have lost their children. This regime change attempt by the US, UK, France, Israel, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and Qatar, along with Western and regional lackey states, is nothing short of a war crime on a scale which demands a Nuremberg-type trial for the perpetrators. The entire thing. That is the vote today. And Syrians have voted no loud and clear. Syria will not submit to the dictatorship of the US, Israel, and allies, all the warmongers and profiteers over its alliances, sovereignty, and independence. It's not really election day, it's victory day. Hard fought and hard won, though neither fight nor victory is totally complete yet, it will be. This is a great article, and I really I urge everybody to take a look at it. As I say, always, it will be in a link. You can find the link below this episode when we post it. Once again, it was titled "Syria Declares Its Independence from U.S. Western Regime Change Addicts." Janice Kortkamp. It's a person to remember her name because, man, she's a great writer. I like her style. I like what she said. Pretty good. So what do you think, Rainer?
Oh, the imperialists still control some of Syria. They control enough of it to be able to steal Syria's oil. And the way that they've managed to do this, in spite of this evidence that the Syrian masses don't consent to their regime change, despite how the Syrian masses and Assad have prevented them from taking over most of Syria, is they've invented a rationale for there being a U.S. adjacent state structure within northeastern Syria. They've told us that there needs to be this Kurdish ethno-state in that part of Syria. They've told us that that state represents the good guys in this scenario, even though that state, Rojava, has been carrying out even more atrocities than the atrocities that Assad has supposedly committed, which I think that's a really disgusting situation, because it's managed to garner the consent not just of the general American public, but from the left, the libertarian left within the West, which is so apt to fall for these kinds of narratives. And the consequence is that for the foreseeable future, like until some financial catastrophe befalls the empire that forces it to pull its forces out of Syria, the US imperialists are going to remain with their occupation of that part of Syria and continue to extract the country's resources.
Yeah, definitely. Absolutely. Absolutely. We've talked about this quite often on this show. So hopefully I don't need to go through all the history. The history is, just the one thing that strikes me is you were saying the atrocities that Assad supposedly perpetrated, which of course he didn't. And the American propaganda and the propaganda of all of America's toady allies has been just so full of lies about Syria that it's incredible to me that they get away with it. Like, all credible investigators have figured out that Assad never used illegal chemical or biological weapons on his own people when these Americans were charging him with that crime. Yet they continue to repeat the same lies long after they're debunked. That's the amazing thing. And this, believe me, experts from the United Nations, experts in chemical warfare, have been there, have taken the samples, and have told us incontrovertibly, no, these chemicals, when chemicals were used, did not come from the government, number one. And in some very notable cases, they didn't happen at all. It was just pure fabrication. There was no chemical attack. They even got to the point of, hiring actors to act like they were being falling dead from poison. It's just astounding. And this white helmet group is basically the medics of the terrorists. They were colluding with the terrorists in manufacturing these lies. It's just quite incredible. We don't need to go over all the history. We've done so on this show many times. So let's see. Next on the list, where are we at? Next on the list, topic number 5, the imperialists are accelerating their own demise. And this is by Rainer Shea. Take it away, Rainer.
I just read Lenin's left-wing communism and infantile disorder, and Lenin observed that through the zeal with which the bourgeoisie internationally has tended to persecute and demonize and try to kill off those who engage in the class struggle, the capitalists have ironically been accelerating the process towards revolution within the countries that these lies and atrocities have been getting carried out. Lenin made the pretty interesting observation that due to the extent to which the bourgeoisie has been fixating on Bolshevism, communism, trying to discredit it through obsessing over it in the bourgeois academic propaganda, the bourgeois media propaganda, creating all of these centers for trying to discredit communism. The bourgeoisie have actually been bringing a crucial amount of people closer towards learning about communism by shedding such a huge light on Marxism. They've been motivating more people than would otherwise be the case to study Marxist theory. And this is what I observed today with the propaganda campaign against China, where the imperialists have been slinging all these narratives, all these lies against China about how China is supposedly committing genocide, supposedly engaging in neocolonialism, imperialism, authoritarianism. And now this article, it examines the parallels between the genocide that's going on in Gaza and the genocide or genocide similar actions that are being carried out by US-backed regimes in places like India and Colombia and Ukraine. Those three countries in particular, I see so many similarities between what Israel is doing, because in Ukraine, since the 2014 US coup that installed a fascist government, the Ukrainian nationalists have been trying to rewrite the country's political DNA to serve NATO's proxy war against Russia, and they've been doing this in the most heinous way imaginable. They've been ethnically cleansing those within the 1/3 of Ukraine who are ethnically Russian or Russian speaking. They've also been ethnically cleansing Romas, Jews. They've been persecuting LGBT people. They've been persecuting journalists and political dissenters. It's truly been fascist, and they've been naturally getting military assistance from Israel through Israeli rifle shipments that have been sent to the Azov Battalion, which is a neo-Nazi militia and terrorist organization that's been doing the Ukrainian regime's dirty work in terms of terrorizing undesirable groups. There's a parallel situation in Colombia where the government has been receiving ample military police training and military technologies from Israel. Colombia has been called by Hugo Chavez the Israel of Latin America, and some of the people involved in this repressive Colombian campaign have taken that as a mark of pride, because their goal is the same as Israel, to successfully suppress the indigenous population where this regime has been set up, so that capital's interests can be fortified. And it's very much fascistic there, obviously, as also evidenced by how this one neo-Nazi has gotten a hold for the doctrine of the police and the military within Colombia. He and other fascists have been propagating this theory for suppressing revolts that they called a dissipated molecular revolution, which seems to be an approach where they hone in on every facet of the left within Colombia. They paint it all basically as a terrorist insurgency so that they can rationalize arresting, executing protest leaders, massacring random protesters, civilians in the streets every night. I just saw something on Twitter where a Colombian helicopter was shooting Colombian citizens in broad daylight. It's really been deadly, and it's really been a parallel to how Israel has waged war against people in Gaza. There's also the parallel between Israel and the Indian Hindu fascist nationalists have been carrying out there, where India has been colonizing Kashmir. And as part of this, they've been murdering a bunch of Muslims. They've been escalating a genocide against India's Muslim population. And they've been doing this with the help of the same types of US NGOs that have been also assisting in the genocide within Palestine. So what we're seeing is an exporting of the US colonial genocide model within the places where the US empire seeks to expand, to build these kinds of manufactured fascistic nations, and to try to wipe out the indigenous populations there in the process. And the imperialists have been doing this by cultivating this laboratory in colonial war within Palestine. Israel is, I view it as a laboratory for innovations in necropolitics and in colonial war, where the Israelis have been carrying out these innovations, these advancements in the technologies that they use to repress populations and wipe out huge amounts of people as part of the great challenge of preserving the Zionist state amid all the forces arrayed against it. And the imperialists have been exporting these military technologies and training innovations to the other places where the imperialists seek to build nations and to wipe out populations.
Yeah, it is very advantageous to the imperialist hegemon, the American empire, that they have this test bed, as you rightfully insinuate, in the Zionist state, the Zionist occupier, settler colonial state occupying Palestine, that has for several decades now had a full-on, upfront, in-your-face fascist government, and still has a fascist government. And so they're able to do things and get away with things that even the hegemons themselves cannot sometimes do. Not at the beginning, anyway. So they let the Israelis test it out first, and then they export it to other parts of the world and their other in other parts of the American hegemony. And finally, now we're seeing this fascist shit coming home to roost, coming home and landing on us. Many examples that we've gone over on this show in the last year, especially, The one that always comes to mind is the black bagging of protesters in Portland, Oregon, and holding them without charge. And this was done by federal agents who wore no insignia, had no identification, all of which is illegal. And they totally got away with it. I mean, no one's questioned them. No one's stopped them. Not yet, anyway. In the past, when they did things like this, and they certainly did this kind of fascism under all Democrat and all Republican regimes over the last century and more. But in the past, there have been forces enough that took this kind of shit to the court and sometimes won in the court against the fascist moves. They didn't win what was necessary, which was the punishment of the fascist American leaders through imprisonment. Execution is my preferred method, but imprisonment would have been just as good, I guess. Execution would have been more satisfying to me. But in any case, none of these people have ever been punished, but they were stopped. So that's at least some consolation, some comfort. Anyway, next on the list, topic number 7, China, Russia, fixing global disorder amid U.S. withdrawal. And let me see. Let me get over here to this. This article is by Yang Sheng and Chen Ching Chen Ching Ching. Chen Ching Ching Ching. That's the way it's pronounced, I'm pretty sure. And this comes from Global Times, which is the Communist Party of China's tabloid newspaper. It's the newspaper for the masses. They also have another daily popular newspaper called the People's Daily, which is more basically an authoritative organ of the Chinese Communist Party. But this one is more for, like, people reading on the train, like they do with tabloids in New York City. Anyway, these two authors say China and Russia held a new round of strategic security consultations on Tuesday in Moscow. And during the frequent interactions between the two major powers in recent months, the world has shown a dangerous trend towards disorder or tensions in some regions, including the Middle East, Eastern Europe, Central Asia, the Western Pacific, due to global strategic shifts made by the United States. Chinese analysts said that the recent change has been generally caused by the decline of U.S. hegemony, and not only will U.S. pressure and hostility push China and Russia to stand closer, the decline in Washington's strength and influence in some regions will also make Beijing and Moscow consider how to figure out new regional order to stabilize the situation and protect their interests after the U.S. pullout. Top Chinese diplomat Yang Jiechi and Russian Security Council Secretary Nikolai Patrushev co-chaired the 16th round of strategic security consultations on Tuesday, which is a high-level meeting focusing on strategic cooperation in confronting both regional and global security and geopolitical threats. Yang, a member of the Politburo of the Communist Party of China Central Committee and director of the Office of Foreign Affairs Commission of the CPC Central Committee, delivered a message from Chinese President Xi Jinping in a phone conference with Russian President Vladimir Putin on Tuesday, which reiterated the bilateral relationship between China and Russia. The Russian president echoed this message, hoping Yang transfers his greetings to Xi and top leaders will maintain close communication. So this article goes on. It's well worth reading. Check it out. We'll leave a link for it. It's in Global Times from May 26, 2021, Wednesday. And it shows that China and Russia, two strong partners, that they are not just resting on their laurels and watching from the sidelines as America spreads this kind of chaos and havoc around the world, that they are doing something about it, that they are taking strategic moves to introduce order where the United States, where the American empire, where the imperialists are introducing only chaos and anarchy and destruction and death and sickness, and the list can go on, ecological disaster. So there you go. Rainer, thoughts?
I saw this article too, and you're gonna be pleasantly acquainted with how I quote it when you see the article I published today. Anyway, the thing that this article is speaking to is the destabilization that's being brought upon much of the globe by the system that the imperialists have set up. It's largely an issue due to simply the socioeconomic model that they've imposed upon so much of the world, where inequality has risen so much. Tens of millions of people have slipped into extreme poverty within the last year alone due to the neoliberal privatization, austerity, wage cut, regressive tax paradigm that the imperialists through the IMF have imposed upon much of the world. And we're seeing the consequences of this in India, especially, where the incredible failure to manage the pandemic due to India's embrace of this free market fanaticism has, from what I understand, led to the creation of a new strain of COVID-19 that's been spreading throughout other parts of Asia, and that's been in the back of my mind lately, as in, does this mean a repeat of the chaos that we've experienced in this last year or so? Is this just repeating the cycle? Does it feel so distant to me as someone on the other side of the world, only because there's a temporary illusion of safety from this strain, like we had a temporary illusion of safety from COVID-19 during the early weeks of it? I don't know, but clearly the model that the imperialists have exported is sowing great instability, great death and suffering around the world. And from what I've gathered, the officials, academics behind this article's sentiments, they're concerned about all the instability that's being caused by the American empire's decline. The sentiments expressed in this article is that the decline of this empire is causing a lot of instability that these Russian and Chinese thinkers view as a danger to humanity. I don't know if the sentiment was recorded prior to when I got cut off earlier, but this neoliberal economic model that the imperialists have exported to places like India has been causing a lot of chaos in terms of disease, in terms of the pandemic, because India's incredible failure to manage the pandemic has resulted in, from what I understand, resulted in the proliferation of a new strain of COVID that's been spreading across Asia. Who knows if this is going to restart the chaos that we've seen in this last year, if the cycle is being repeated all over again. I don't know, but clearly this socioeconomic model that the imperialists have imposed upon most of the world is putting humanity in a lot of peril, and the concern of the Russians and the Chinese is to mitigate this peril as much as possible so that they can build a new peaceful order in the ruins of this anarchy.
Well put. Well put. And it's good that you that you're familiar with that article, and maybe we can revisit it a bit more. I didn't catch it this go round, I guess because you put it up pretty late in the process after I had gone and harvested all your articles. Okay, last on the list, finally. Anti-colonial revolution is our only route towards safety. Rainer Shea.
You were mentioning earlier how a lot of even the people who call themselves Marxists in the United States have failed to grasp the true nature of our conditions, probably because they're caught up in the colonial chauvinism that American culture ingrains into everybody's minds. And this last month, I've encountered a real irritating example of this, because oh my God, this is such a rabbit hole. I encountered this guy, Austin Tamargo, who took the care to meet me in person when he traveled to my hometown recently. But a couple of weeks ago, he revealed his stance of being expressly opposed to anti-colonial revolution. He tried to both sides it by saying, I support decolonization, but really he supports the continuation of the United States under a Marxist model. He does not support the full jurisdiction of the indigenous First Nations, which he says don't exist anymore. And in response to this guy's garbage arguments, which I saw being echoed by other people who called themselves Marxists, though, of course, the majority of my Facebook Marxist community was against these people, I wrote this article which argued that if the American chauvinist facet of the Marxist movement in this country were to prevail, and if they were to do their best at trying to create a socialist United States, they would fail. There would be so many contradictions there that their socialist movement would be so easily co-opted by the ideologies of imperialism and white supremacy, as it clearly already is. And all that would come from it is a victory for the reactionaries, where the forces of capital and the remnants of empire managed to carve up and exploit and terrorize what remains of this country, and put us under a dark future from which there won't be any relief until we decide to unite behind an anti-colonial movement that rejects the chauvinism of these types of Marxists. They promise us a pragmatic solution. They claim that that continuing under the American banner is our only hope for victory as socialists in this country. But all that will come from that is a dead end.
Yeah, it's going to be a complicated situation. That's for damn sure.
Yeah.
And yeah, a lot of people think of this in a kind of a schematic way, and it's not going to happen in a schematic way at all. There's not just going to be a revolution, a Marxist-Leninist revolution in America, and the United States of America becomes the United Socialist States of America. No, that's not going to happen. First of all, we can probably, as you've mentioned in this show alone, we can probably expect some disintegration of the metropolitan center, as the sociologists call it, of the belly of the beast of the United States. We can expect some kind of disintegration politically as things fracture, as things get worse, and they will get worse. There's absolutely no doubt of that. Just the direction downhill that the imperial hegemon is headed will be sure to bring us to that. And just as the point that the leaders of China and Russia were making about the chaos being spread by the hegemon, by the American empire, as it crumbles, as it declines, as it goes through its death agony. They're noticing it. I'm noticing it. You're noticing it. We certainly give a lot of examples of it on this show. So yeah, things are definitely not going to go in this linear, schematic fashion that these mechanistic Marxists think that they will at all. Not at all. I tend to think that we should avoid prediction on this kind of thing, other than predicting that that it's going to be a messy situation, very chaotic. So, with that, anything more on that? Rainer?
No, other than that, Boston to Margot used to be a self-styled R&B rapper who had a song called "Oh Baby," which he privated before I could listen to it. But reportedly, I saw on Facebook, it included the line, "Oh baby, let me take you a ride in my Mercedes." His R&B rapper name was Crypto Hustler.
That's bad. Sorry about that. Okay. Looks like we've come to an end to the show tonight. And I want to thank Rainer, of course, for his great contributions. I want to thank all of the loyal viewers of the show, listeners of the show even. When I get around to putting it out in the audio form, which I try to do each week, but don't always succeed. I have missed some weeks. Anyway, until next week, I invite you back again. Sorry that we missed last week. I was, as I mentioned, I was in the middle of packing, moving, so forth. I'm in the middle of unpacking now, so a little bit chaotic in Chris Driscoll's life here, but hopefully we'll get back on schedule. And with that, Rainer, so long. It's always a great pleasure. And goodbye to everyone else. I bid you all a sweet adieu.